She was minutes from death. Then a dog no one had seen in a year appeared. Clara was only supposed to be gone 10 minutes. The walk from school to home was short-safe, but snow fell faster than forecasts. Winds picked up. Visibility vanished. By the time her mother noticed the clock, Clara was already lost. For hours, no one knew where to search. No prints, no leads, just cold silence. And then by sheer chance, two strangers walking through the storm heard something, a whimper, a sound so soft it could have been the wind. What they found wasn't just a lost girl. It was a story that would stun the town, go viral, and reveal the return of a hero long thought gone. A search and rescue dog declared dead after an avalanche had reappeared in the last place anyone expected, shielding a stranger's child from the cold. His name was Echo. And this is how he found her. The snow had a way of muting everything, not just sound, but thought. Each flake fell like a hush over the world, erasing the sharp edges of the past and softening the jagged parts of memory that never seemed to heal right. Daniel pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and adjusted the wool scarf that had already begun to freeze along the edges. His breath came in slow puffs, ghosting against the frigid air. "You sure this was a good idea?" he asked, half laughing, half shivering. Beside him, Marcus kept walking, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Better than staying inside listening to the radiator click." The two men trudged through the park trail, once a summer haven for kids and families, now transformed into a silent white desert. Trees lined either side of the path, their branches heavy with snow, creaking softly under the weight. No footprints ahead of them. No sign of life. Only the faint, almost rhythmic crunch of boots on ice, and the occasional wind slicing through the trees like a blade. They hadn't really planned to walk far. Just around the block, maybe. Get out of their own heads. Daniel had been nursing a string of bad dreams lately, leftovers from his time overseas. And Marcus, well, Marcus rarely spoke about what he carried. But Daniel knew. You didn't share 2 tours, the loss of 3 teammates, and a tent in the middle of nowhere without learning how someone holds pain. So they walked, silently, side by side, as they had always done. "I'll be honest," Daniel said, his voice fogging the air. "I'm starting to lose feeling in my face." "That's how you know it's working," Marcus deadpanned. Daniel chuckled, then stopped short. "Wait, did you hear that?" Marcus froze, his head tilted slightly, not just listening, but listening, like a man trained to hear what others missed. He held up one gloved hand for silence. There it was again, faint, barely a sound, almost indistinguishable from the whine of the wind curling through the treetops. A whimper, soft, fragile, inhuman. Marcus's spine straightened. He turned toward the trees on their left, where the snow lay deeper, less disturbed. "That's not wind." Daniel frowned. "Could be a fox or a rabbit stuck." "No," Marcus said quietly. "That was a dog." He was already moving off the path, boots sinking deeper into the powder with each step. Daniel hesitated, glancing behind them. The trail was already fading under a new layer of falling snow. But something in Marcus's posture, a shift in tension, the way his shoulders squared, kept him from arguing. They pushed through low-hanging branches, past frost-stiff shrubs, into a clearing just beyond the trail. The trees thinned here, forming a rough semicircle, like nature had pulled back to protect something. The whimper came again, clearer now. Marcus slowed. His breath hitched. Lying in the snow was a shape. At first glance it could have been a pile of debris-drifted snow caught on bark or a fallen log. But as they drew closer, the truth came into sharp, painful focus. A dog. German Shepherd. Its fur was matted with ice and frost, clumped in places like it had been lying there for hours. The snow around it was disturbed just slightly, as if it had tried to move, then given up. Its body curled into a tight crescent, unmoving except for the rise and fall of shallow, almost imperceptible breaths. Marcus dropped to one knee. "Hey, buddy." His voice was low, steady, instinctively gentle. Daniel crouched beside him. "You think he's a stray?" Before Marcus could answer, his breath caught in his throat. Something else was nestled against the dog's chest, smaller, barely visible beneath the dog's belly and the thick white snow. Daniel leaned in, brushing snow aside with his bare hand. A face, pale, still, a child. Time fractured in that moment. Daniel's heart slammed into his ribcage as he dropped lower, reaching with trembling hands. "Oh my God, Marcus, it's a girl." The dog didn't move, didn't growl, didn't resist. It simply stayed curled, shielding her even now, like its final command was to protect. Marcus's hands went to the girl's wrist. "She's got a pulse, but it's slow. Too slow." Daniel's mind raced. "We have to move, now." "If she's out here much longer." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Marcus nodded and carefully peeled his coat off, wrapping it around the girl's fragile body. She couldn't have been older than 9 or 10. Her lips were blue, eyelashes dusted with frost. She hadn't stirred once. Daniel scooped her up into his arms, her head lolling against his chest like a rag doll. "Go," Marcus said. "You take her. I'll bring the dog." "Are you sure?" Marcus was already stripping off his scarf, bundling the German Shepherd into his arms as gently as he could. The dog didn't resist, just let out the faintest exhale. "Meet you back at the road," Daniel said. Then he turned and ran, stumbling through snowbanks, heart pounding harder with every step. Marcus remained behind, just a beat longer, watching the path Daniel had taken disappear into the storm. Then he looked down at the dog in his arms. "You stayed," he whispered. "You didn't leave her." The dog's eyes fluttered open, just for a second, and in them Marcus saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Purpose. The trees thickened around them as Marcus led the way, boots crunching through knee-deep snow, breath shallow and sharp in the cold. The faint whimper had come again just once, like a last thread of life unraveling. The deeper they moved off-trail, the quieter the world seemed to grow, as though the snow itself were holding its breath. Then they saw it. A dark shape hunched low at the base of a crooked pine, half buried under wind-blown drifts. For a split second it looked like a stump or something discarded. But as Marcus stepped forward and dropped to his knees, brushing away the snow with his gloved hands, the truth emerged. It was a dog, a German Shepherd, adult-sized, female, most likely, though hard to tell with her fur stiff and laced with frost. Her ribs rose and fell, barely. Her eyes didn't open. She was curled into herself tightly, too tightly for an animal that size. Daniel took a step closer. "She's alive?" Marcus nodded faintly. "Barely, but she didn't cry out when I touched her. She's spent, totally." Then his hand stilled. There was something else. Nestled tightly against the dog's underbelly beneath her forelegs, like a secret wrapped in fur and ice, was a smaller form. Still, fragile. Not a pup, not fur. Skin. Human skin. Marcus's throat tightened. Oh, God. He brushed aside more snow, carefully, as though afraid of what he might reveal. And then it was there. A tiny, pale face. A girl, no older than 10, tucked against the dog's body like she had crawled there seeking shelter, or had been pulled in by the dog herself. Daniel knelt beside him, mouth open, breath catching. She's not moving. Her skin had lost all color. Her cheeks were white beneath a dusting of frost, her lips blue and cracked. Eyelashes were iced together, the kind of cold that didn't just cling to the surface but sunk in and settled into blood, into bones. Marcus reached for her wrist. His fingers trembled, not from the cold but from something deeper. When he found a pulse, he almost didn't believe it. It was there, barely a flicker. Weak, slowing. "She's alive," he whispered, but not for long. Daniel stared at the girl, at the way her small body was curled instinctively into the dog's, how their heat had become one, even if barely enough to matter. Did the dog do this?" he asked quietly. Marcus nodded. She shielded her. A gust of wind roared through the trees, and both men instinctively leaned over the girl and dog to protect them, as if their bodies could block what the storm hadn't. For a moment, the only sounds were the shaking branches above and the harsh, uneven breaths of the men trying to figure out what to do next. The dog made a small, broken sound. A breath, maybe, or a sigh. Her head shifted just slightly against the snow toward Clara's face. "She's not just curled," Marcus said. "She's holding her." Daniel's voice cracked, like she never meant to leave her behind. Neither man spoke for several seconds, because in that moment, beneath the cold and silence and threat of death, something ancient and wordless passed between them. A kind of reverence, not for the girl, not for the rescue, but for the dog. She had been out here alone, possibly for hours, days even. No collar, no human voice calling her name. And yet when she found a child lost in the whiteout, her instincts hadn't failed her. She hadn't run for help. She hadn't left to save herself. She stayed. Even when her body began to shut down, even when the snow covered her back and stole the heat from her lungs, she stayed. Daniel wiped at his face, though he wasn't sure if it was melting snow or tears. "We need to move. Fast." "I'll carry the dog," Marcus said. "She won't make it far like this." "Then we make it fast." Daniel slid his arms beneath the girl who remained utterly still. Her limbs flopped like cloth, but her chest rose, shallow, erratic. That was enough. As Daniel stood, the dog whimpered again, barely audible. "She knows," Marcus said. "She knows we're taking her." Daniel looked down at the shepherd, and for the briefest moment her eyes opened. Just a crack, dark, wet, exhausted, but watching Clara. "I promise," Daniel whispered. "We're going to save her." The dog blinked once. Marcus pulled off his scarf, then his outer coat, and wrapped the shepherd as best he could, then gently scooped her into his arms. She didn't resist, didn't move, but her breathing stirred against his chest. They stood in the clearing for one last second. 2 soldiers, one carrying a girl, one carrying the dog who wouldn't let her die. Then they turned, and the snow closed in behind them like a curtain, erasing the scene. But what the snow had hidden, it hadn't taken, not yet. Daniel's arms trembled, not from the weight, but from the sheer fragility of what he carried. Clara's body was light, too light. Her limbs dangled with no resistance, like the snow had emptied her of everything but the barest trace of life. Her head rested limply against his shoulder, and each step he took felt like wading through molasses and fear. He didn't remember making the decision to run. There was no moment of strategy, no military-style discussion of best routes or backup plans, just instinct, pure, gut-driven instinct. Get the girl out. "Go," Marcus had said, already kneeling over the shepherd, unfastening his coat, voice calm but sharp as command. "I'll get the dog. Just go." So Daniel did. He turned and sprinted, boots punching through deep snow, lungs burning in the frigid air. His legs screamed from the cold, from the uneven ground, from the panic blooming across his chest like frostbite. The trees blurred past him in flashes of white and black. He couldn't think, couldn't feel his fingers, couldn't hear anything but the rasp of his own breath and the girl's shallow exhale brushing against his collarbone. "Hold on," he whispered. "Hold on, sweetheart. I've got you." The wind picked up, shrieking through the trees like something angry. The trail he and Marcus had walked earlier was nearly gone now, buried under a new layer of snow. Everything was disappearing. Everything but her. Behind him, Marcus worked fast. He'd stripped down to a thermal layer, already soaked through with sweat and snow. His coat-thick military issue was wrapped around the dog's shivering body like a makeshift cocoon. The shepherd was nearly motionless, her chest barely rising, but her eyes had opened again, just for a second, as Daniel disappeared with Clara. Marcus spoke softly, like he would to any injured canine under fire. "You did good," he murmured. "You stayed. Now let's get you home." He scooped her up, feeling the dead weight in his arms. She didn't resist. Her head lolled against his shoulder, but her body was still warm, barely. That was all he needed. Marcus pushed forward, following the faint impressions of Daniel's footsteps. But the snow was falling harder now, blinding. The storm had turned, becoming sharp and spiteful. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The world blurred into a swirl of white chaos. He tightened his grip and kept going. At the main road, Daniel stumbled out of the trees, heart hammering. The girl had grown heavier somehow, or maybe he had just grown more afraid. His knees buckled and he barely caught himself before collapsing with her. "Help!" he called hoarsely into the empty street. "Someone!" No answer. Then a miracle. A low rumble. Headlights. A snowplow came crawling around the bend, clearing the street in methodical arcs. Daniel staggered into the road, waving his free hand, yelling again. The vehicle skidded to a stop. The driver, mid-50s, flannel jacket, panic written all over his face, leapt down from the cab. "Jesus, what happened?" "She's freezing hypothermic," Daniel gasped. "We need EMS, now!" The driver didn't hesitate. He grabbed the radio from his belt, barked into it with practiced urgency. "This is Unit 12. I've got a child, unresponsive, possibly hypothermic. Need medics to Ridgeline and Cedar fast. Repeat, child in critical." Daniel crouched in the snow, trying to protect Clara from the wind with what little body heat he had left. She hadn't moved. Not once. Her breaths were shallow, faint. Her eyelids fluttered, but they didn't open. The plow driver pulled a spare thermal blanket from his seat and helped wrap her tightly. "Hang on, sweetheart," he whispered. "They're coming." A minute passed. Then two. Then sirens. Daniel had never loved that sound so much. Back on the path, Marcus broke through the final stretch of trees just as he saw the flashing lights in the distance. The vet clinic wasn't far less than a mile down the road, but the weight in his arms was shifting. Not heavier, looser. The shepherd's body had gone slack, not just exhausted limp. "No, no, no," he murmured. "Don't give up now." He pushed harder through the snow, gritting his teeth, eyes stinging. He recognized this dog, not by name, not by face, but by feel. That posture, that calm under pressure, that willingness to let herself freeze to keep someone else alive. She wasn't just any dog. She had been trained, programmed to protect, and somewhere deep inside, she had followed one last command without handler, without reward, until her body collapsed. Marcus blinked back tears and kept moving. At the hospital, paramedics surrounded Clara in a blur of motion. She was placed on a stretcher, vitals checked, oxygen mask fitted. Daniel stood back, arms shaking, lips purple. He barely registered the questions they asked him. All he could see was her hand. Small, motionless, hanging off the edge of the gurney like a forgotten thread. "Her core temp's in the 20s, one medic said. "She's critical. Intubate. Start warming protocol now." They wheeled her inside, disappearing behind double doors. Daniel stood alone for a second longer, then collapsed to his knees. Marcus arrived at the emergency vet just minutes later. The techs were already outside, called in by the staff who had recognized his number from years ago. "She's crashing," Marcus said as they rushed forward. "She kept a child alive in the snow. She's the only reason that kid's still breathing." They didn't waste time with questions. The shepherd was taken inside, placed on a heated table, monitors attached. Fluids started. A tag was discovered beneath her frozen collar. Worn, but still legible. Echo. Sayar K9. Unit 14B. One of the techs stared at it, eyes wide. "No way. She's the dog from the avalanche story last year, the one they never found." Marcus sat down hard on the bench, staring at nothing. If she had disappeared and still found her way to that child, then maybe something bigger was at work than training. Maybe some instincts didn't fade with time. Maybe heroes, real heroes, just keep going. The road was empty, an endless strip of white veiled in wind. Daniel stumbled onto the shoulder, the snow up to his knees now, Clara's weight growing heavier in his arms, not because she was heavy, but because she wasn't. Her skin had the unnatural chill of something far past cold. His fingers, despite their numbness, could feel it like porcelain left outside in winter. No heat, no twitch, no reflex. "Come on, kid," he whispered hoarsely. "Don't you check out on me now." He turned toward the sound before he saw it. The low grind of steel on asphalt, guttural, mechanical. A snowplow. It came through the blizzard like a ship from some frozen war zone, headlights dimmed by flurries, orange beacon flashing, tires spitting slush as it crawled through the mess. Daniel ran into the road. The driver hit the brakes hard, the plow fishtailing slightly before slowing to a halt. A door slammed. Boots crunched. "What the hell?" "She's freezing, child, unresponsive," Daniel shouted, staggering forward. "We need EMS, now!" The plow operator, mid-50s, stocky, breath heaving, didn't waste time. He pulled a radio off his belt and barked into it with the kind of urgency that only comes from knowing what's really at stake. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I've got a juvenile, female, possibly hypothermic, non-responsive. Location, Ridgeline and Cedar access. Request immediate medical response." He turned to Daniel, eyes narrowing beneath a frosted beanie. "How long has she been out here?" "I don't know," Daniel said, voice cracking. "She wasn't moving when we found her. Dog had curled around her. Might have been the only thing keeping her alive. The driver's face tightened. Truck's got a heater. Let's get her inside. Daniel clambered into the cab, holding Clara close. The warmth inside felt like stepping into another world, but Clara didn't react. Her cheeks remained pale, her eyelids still shut. Lips tinged blue, unmoving. The driver climbed in beside him, cranking the heat and grabbing a thermal blanket from behind the seat. "Wrap her in this. Don't rub the skin. Just insulate." Daniel followed every word, his hands trembling. "She hasn't made a sound." A long beat passed. Then a voice came crackling over the radio. "EMS en route, ETA 3 minutes." The driver pressed the mic. "Roger that. They better come quick." Outside, the wind howled harder. Daniel looked down at Clara. Her breath barely fogged the air. Every few seconds he leaned in, terrified she'd gone still. He didn't even know her name, didn't know where she lived, what she liked, what color her bedroom walls were. He only knew one thing: she was running out of time. 3 minutes felt like 30. But then sirens. Faint, then louder. Blue and red lights broke through the curtain of snow like hope clawing through despair. An ambulance skidded to a halt, and 2 EMTs jumped out, already pulling equipment from the back. Daniel climbed down, clutching Clara tight. She's freezing, barely breathing. One EMT, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a jaw clenched in focus, met him halfway. She took Clara with the gentleness of someone who'd done this before, but never got used to it. The second EMT lifted her sleeve and clipped on a pulse ox monitor. His face turned grim immediately. "Sats are in the low 70s. BP is crashing." "Let's get her in," the woman snapped. Inside the ambulance, the heater was already blasting. The team laid Clara on a stretcher, unzipped her jacket, and covered her in warming packs and thermal blankets. A heated airway tube was prepared. A heart monitor beeped rapidly, then slowed. "Core temp?" the male EMT asked, inserting a probe. 25.3. The woman exhaled sharply. "She's dropping too fast." Daniel stood outside the doors, fists clenched, watching through the frosted windows, watching them fight for her. One of the EMTs poked his head out. "You the one who found her?" "Yeah." "What's her name?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, swallowing the lump in his throat. "She was out cold when we found her. There was a dog, a German shepherd, curled around her. The dog didn't move either." The EMT blinked. "You serious?" Daniel nodded. They were like one body, like the dog refused to leave her side. The EMT stared for a second, then nodded slowly. "Well, whatever that dog did, it bought her time." He ducked back in. Seconds later, the doors slammed shut. The siren kicked on, and the ambulance disappeared into the storm. Daniel stood in the snow long after the lights vanished, the plow driver at his side. Neither spoke. There were no right words. Finally, the driver clapped him on the back. "You did good, son." Daniel gave a small, hollow nod. "Let's hope it was enough." He turned back toward the trail. Marcus wasn't far behind, and the dog, Echo. She still had a heartbeat, too. The wipers smeared half-melted snow across the windshield, clearing just enough for Marcus to glimpse the road ahead. His knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, swaddled in his coat and a hastily layered wool blanket, lay the German shepherd, still, silent, and impossibly light. Each breath she took was labored, as if her body had to remember how. "Hang in there," Marcus muttered, glancing over again. "Just a little longer." The heater roared. He'd cranked it to the highest setting the moment he started the truck, trying to chase the cold from her fragile body. But the chill in her bones felt older than the storm. More than just frostbite, it was the kind of cold that came from time, from loneliness, from waiting too long. The shelter came into view. A small brick building tucked between rows of shuttered shops, its faded sign swinging in the wind. Ridgeline Veterinary and Rescue Center. Marcus pulled into the lot and laid on the horn. A single figure appeared behind the glass door. Dr. Lynn Whitaker, mid-40s, graying ponytail, eyes sharp enough to read your soul. She'd trained Marcus years ago during his volunteer rotations, back when he needed something, anything, to anchor him after his last deployment. She didn't wait for explanations. She flung the door open as Marcus parked and met him halfway down the ramp. Blanket, German Shepherd, found in the woods with a child barely alive. Whitaker blinked once, then held the door open. Bring her. Table 2. The clinic was warm and quiet, faintly smelling of iodine and wet fur. Marcus gently laid the dog down on a padded steel table. Whitaker was already snapping on gloves, barking soft orders to her tech. A young woman named Ellie who moved fast, despite the look of shock frozen on her face. Vitals are unstable, Marcus said. She's cold to the core, barely responsive, but alive. She kept the girl warm, shielded her. Whitaker knelt to check the dog's gums, her jaw tightening. She's crashing. Get fluid subcutaneous first. I don't want to push anything through her veins yet. Her system won't take it. Ellie rushed off. Whitaker gently peeled back the blanket, revealing the stiffened frame beneath, fur tangled, paws cracked and raw, ice crusted deep into the pads. That's no backyard mutt, she said quietly. I thought the same thing, Marcus replied. She didn't panic, didn't run, just stayed. Whitaker examined the dog's neck. The collar was old, barely intact. But as she tugged at the worn nylon strap, something small and metallic slipped free. A tag, bent, scratched, partially covered in frost. Whitaker cleaned it with a towel and read aloud, Echo, SAR K9 Unit 14B. She stopped cold, looked at Marcus. He froze. No way, he whispered. Whitaker turned the tag over, nothing on the back but rust and time. She's that Echo, he said slowly, mind racing. The name alone was enough. There had been stories. A year ago. Avalanche in the Rockies. A search and rescue unit caught in a secondary slide. Handler injured. The team scattered. One canine never came back. Missing, presumed dead, until now. Whitaker gently placed her hand on Echo's chest, feeling the faint rhythm under fur and ribs. I remember reading that report. The dog vanished during the extraction. There were rumors she kept searching long after the crew pulled out. She found Clara, Marcus said, his voice lower now. No one told her to. No leash, no command. She just knew. For a moment, the room held its breath. Whitaker swallowed. She's badly underweight. Signs of long-term exposure, scarring along the flank. This girl's been on her own for a long time. But she still remembered her job. Whitaker didn't respond, just reached out and rested her hand on Echo's head, the motion slow, reverent. Echo didn't open her eyes, but she let out the faintest sigh, a breath like surrender or relief. Ellie returned with warmed fluids and set to work with quiet efficiency. Marcus stood back, his heart thudding with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Awe. He stared at Echo. This dog, who had survived God knew what, disappeared for almost a year, only to re-emerge in the middle of a snowstorm wrapped around a girl she'd never met. She could have run, could have curled up and died alone, could have disappeared like so many others, but she stayed. And because of that, A child had a second chance. An hour later, Whitaker updated him. She's stable for now. Still critical, but she's got fight. Honestly, she shouldn't be alive. Marcus nodded. Yeah, that's what they said about her before, too. He moved to the edge of the table and knelt. Echo's chest rose and fell in slow rhythm. Her fur, now partially dry, was still matted. Her paws were bandaged. But in the silence, there was something else. Not noise, not movement, presence. Like she wasn't gone. Not really. Marcus leaned in. You were supposed to be lost, he said quietly. But you weren't, were you? His voice cracked. You were just waiting. Echo didn't move, but her ear twitched. The hallway outside the trauma unit was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that clung to walls after someone screamed, the kind that buzzed in the chest and made every second feel like an hour. Daniel sat hunched forward in a vinyl chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly they were losing color. His shirt was still damp from the snow, his knuckles still raw from the cold. But he didn't notice. All he could think about was the girl, Clara. He'd heard her name just once, spoken softly by a nurse when the medics wheeled her in. Clara Reynolds, age 10, no known allergies. Now she was somewhere beyond the double doors, surrounded by machines and people in surgical masks who hadn't even been planning to work that night. Her body temp had been 25 degrees Celsius, just a few decimal points above the threshold where the heart gives up. She had seized twice in the ambulance, once more in the trauma bay. No one had promised anything. No one could. Inside the ER, Clara looked like a ghost under warm lights. Her skin had a bluish pallor that even the thermal blankets couldn't erase. IV lines fed warm saline into her veins. A specialized blood rewarming machine normally used in severe trauma cases circulated her blood, slowly coaxing her core temperature back toward safety. Electrodes dotted her chest like a constellation of hope. Her tiny chest rose and fell beneath the thermal sheets, but her eyes remained shut. A team of pediatric intensivists stood nearby, murmuring in quiet tones, eyes trained on every subtle dip and spike in the monitor's readout. "Brain functions intact," one nurse whispered. "She's fighting." Another added, "The dog must have stayed on her all night. That's the only way she's not already in arrest." A third voice, softer. "It shouldn't have worked." But it did. No one wanted to say it out loud, but they all felt it. She was alive because of something that wasn't supposed to happen. A miracle in fur and frost. By midnight, the seizures stopped. Her heartbeat stabilized. She was still unconscious, still balancing on a razor's edge, but she'd made it through the first, longest stretch of night. Daniel stayed until 3 a.m., before a nurse gently urged him to go home and rest. He nodded, stood, and didn't move. Not for another 10 minutes, just watched the doors. Then he left without a word. Across town, the lights inside Ridgeline Veterinary Clinic still burned. Marcus had refused to leave. He sat on a stool beside the heating bed where Echo now lay, half wrapped in warmed towels, her paw hooked up to fluids, a space heater humming at her side. The techs had done everything they could, treated the frostbite, applied ointment to her cracked pads, rehydrated her system inch by inch. Her breathing was steadier now, still shallow but consistent, the low kind of breath that meant the body wasn't fighting everything anymore, just enough to stay alive. Dr. Whitaker came in quietly and rested a hand on Marcus's shoulder. She's responding. Marcus didn't look away from Echo. She'll need weeks of rehab. Nutritional therapy. Might have heart strain, but... The vet hesitated, then smiled, soft and small. I think she's going to pull through. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It escaped from deep in his chest, almost like a sob, but quieter, stiller. She went straight to that girl, he said finally. No hesitation, curled around her like she'd been trained for it. But there's no handler, no leash, nothing. Whitaker nodded. Maybe the job never left her. Marcus reached out and let his hand rest gently against Echo's shoulder. Her fur was rough, uneven. She didn't stir, but she was here, alive. Maybe she wasn't lost, he said quietly. Maybe she was waiting for the one who needed her most. Whitaker didn't speak. There was nothing else to say. At dawn, Daniel returned to the hospital, eyes bloodshot, fingers trembling as he reached for the coffee cup someone had left by the nurse's station. He didn't ask for updates. He didn't have to. One look through the glass panel told him what words hadn't yet. Clara was still there, still breathing, still fighting. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass and whispered something only he could hear. Hang in there, kid. The dog made it. Now it's your turn. Somewhere, in the soft light of a quiet vet clinic, Echo's ear twitched. Her body, still weak, still healing, shivered slightly. But her eyes opened for the first time in hours. And in that tiny, exhausted blink, something returned. Not strength, not energy, but awareness. She was still here. And somewhere out there, so was the girl. The machines hummed softly in rhythm. A monitor beeped with steady patience. Not rushed, not erratic, just there. Like a quiet reminder that something fragile had chosen not to break. Sunlight filtered weakly through the frosted window pane of room 204. It was pale and hesitant, as if unsure it was welcome. A nurse stood in the corner, updating vitals, her movements precise but gentle. She didn't speak. No one had, not for a while now. The doctors had said Clara might wake up, but they weren't sure when. The trauma her body had endured, the time her brain had spent starved of warmth, it all left space for questions no one could bear to ask. So they waited. Clara had been still for almost 2 days, her face so quiet it barely looked like a child's anymore. Just skin and sleep and silence. Her fingers twitched occasionally, and once she let out a sound that could have been a sigh. But mostly she floated between here and somewhere else. Until now. The nurse nearly missed it. A blink, faint, slow. Then again. Clara's eyelids fluttered once more, then stayed open. Her eyes, pale hazel and unfocused, scanned the blurry light above her. The nurse turned instantly, voice trembling. "Clara? Sweetheart, can you hear me?" A long pause. The girl's lips parted, dry and cracked. Her throat worked, but no sound came at first. Then a whisper, so faint it almost didn't register. "Is he safe?" The nurse leaned in, tears already welling in her eyes. "Who, honey?" Clara blinked slowly, her lashes clumped with sleep and saline. She didn't ask where she was, didn't ask for her mother, didn't ask what had happened. Her voice cracked again. "The dog." The nurse's hand went to her own chest, as if trying to hold her heart still. "Yes," she whispered, kneeling beside the bed. "Yes, he's safe. He's okay." Clara's eyes closed again, just for a second, and when they opened, they were wet. Not with panic, not with fear, with relief. She didn't cry, but her mouth trembled, and her fingers shifted beneath the blanket like they were reaching for something they remembered. "He didn't leave me," she said, voice smaller than breath. "He stayed." The nurse nodded, now openly crying. "He did, sweetheart. He stayed." For a long moment the room was silent again, this time not out of worry, but reverence, because those were her first words. Not about the snow, not about the pain, not even about the cold, but about the one who had chosen her, the one who had curled his body around hers in the darkest moment and asked for nothing in return, the one who had refused to leave. Later that morning, when the pediatrician came in, she found Clara half asleep, but aware, her gaze softer, less distant. She asked about the dog, the doctor repeated, gently adjusting her chart. The nurse nodded. It was the first thing out of her mouth. The doctor smiled, though her eyes were glassy. "That's rare." "I don't think so," the nurse said softly. "I think she knew. She just didn't want to wake up until she was sure he made it." That evening, Rachel Reynolds stood just outside the doorway, one hand pressed against the frame like it was holding her up. Her daughter, her only child, was alive. She didn't know how. The doctors couldn't explain it in anything more than clinical language. Early hypothermia response, physiological shutdown, rapid warming protocol, pediatric resilience. But Rachel knew better. She had seen the photos the EMTs took when they found Clara, the girl buried in snow, and the dog, wrapped around her like a heartbeat made of fur and instinct. She hadn't believed it at first, but then one of the medics had said, voice quiet with disbelief, "That dog is the only reason she made it." And now Clara was here, awake, asking for him. Inside the room, the nurse returned to check vitals again. Clara was awake, her cheeks slightly pink now, her eyes clearer. She smiled weakly when the nurse came in. "Do you think I could see him?" she asked. "The dog?" The nurse hesitated. "He's at the vet right now. He was really cold too and tired, but he's okay. He made it." Clara nodded slowly, eyelids drooping. "He didn't bark. He just stayed all night." "You remember that?" Clara blinked. "I wasn't afraid. Not when he was there." The nurse couldn't find any words, so she just reached out and gently smoothed the child's hair back from her face. "You're very brave," she whispered, "and so is he." And somewhere across town, in a softly lit recovery pen, Echo stirred. His breathing had steadied. His muscles twitched in his sleep, as if chasing memories. But he didn't whimper, didn't flinch. Only once did he move his head slightly toward the door like he sensed something beyond the walls, like he heard her voice in his bones. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and coffee burnt, old coffee that had been sitting on a warmer too long. Marcus had always hated that smell. It reminded him of waiting rooms and words that changed lives. But this time, something about it felt different, like a memory he hadn't lived yet. He glanced down the hallway, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, boots damp from slush tracked in off the street. Daniel walked beside him, quiet, face unreadable. They hadn't spoken much on the ride over, not because there was nothing to say, but because they were both afraid of what the answer might be. When they reached the nurse's station, A young woman in navy scrubs looked up, eyes flicking from Daniel to Marcus and back. "Clara Reynolds?" Daniel asked gently. "We were the ones who found her. We just wanted to see how she's doing." The nurse tilted her head. "You're the two from the park?" Daniel nodded. Marcus added, "She asked about the dog. Echo. We thought maybe, if she's awake, just a quick visit." The nurse's expression softened. She leaned over the desk and tapped into a computer. After a pause, she nodded. "She's stable, awake, still weak, but alert." Then her eyes met theirs. "She asked about him again this morning," she said, lowering her voice. "Called him the quiet dog who stayed." Daniel smiled softly. "She's in room 204, the nurse continued. "You can see her from the hallway window, just for a minute. Her mom's in with her now, but I think she'd like to see your faces." They nodded in gratitude and moved down the corridor, their footsteps muffled by linoleum and the hum of fluorescent lights. Room 204 sat tucked at the end of the wing, flanked by sun-glossed windows and a view of the snowy city below. Through the narrow glass pane in the door, they could see her, Clara, sitting upright in bed, her shoulders wrapped in a blue hospital blanket, her hands resting quietly in her lap. Rachel sat at her bedside, reading something aloud, probably a children's book borrowed from the gift shop cart. The rhythm of her voice was calm, but her free hand was curled around Clara's wrist, like she still didn't quite believe she was real. Daniel knocked gently on the doorframe. Rachel looked up. Her eyes widened, and for a moment something unreadable flickered there, surprise, then gratitude, then something deeper. She stood, came to the door, and stepped out into the hallway, quietly shutting it behind her. "I remember you," she said. Her voice trembled just enough to be human. "You carried her." Daniel nodded. "We just wanted to see if she was okay." Rachel looked down, then smiled. "She's more than okay. She's here. She shouldn't be, but she is." Marcus stepped forward. "And Echo?" Rachel's smile turned wistful. "She asks about him every few hours. It's like everything else is a blur to her. But not him. Not the way he lay beside her." "She remembers that?" Marcus asked, surprised. Rachel nodded. "She said she never felt cold when he was next to her. Just tired, but safe." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "He made it. We thought she should know." Rachel's hand went to her chest. "You don't know how much that'll mean to her." Then she opened the door halfway and stepped aside. "Just a moment," she whispered. "She's still a bit overwhelmed, but I think this will help." The moment Clara saw them through the door, something shifted. Her eyes widened first. Then her shoulders lifted almost involuntarily. Her fingers, which had been playing nervously with the blanket, stopped. Daniel stepped in slowly. Marcus just behind. "Hey there," Daniel said gently. Clara's lips parted, and for a second she just stared. Then her voice came barely above a whisper. "You found me?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah. We heard a sound in the woods. You and Echo were brave, both of you." "Is he—" her breath caught. "Is he still here?" Marcus took a step forward. "He's at the vet, resting. But he made it. He's alive, Clara. He's going to be okay." Something in Clara's face changed. Not dramatic, not loud, just the slow, wondrous unfurling of a child's smile. It was small, barely there, but real. Earned. Her whole body seemed to ease into that moment, like she had been holding something, fear, tension, uncertainty, and now it could finally be released. "He didn't leave me," she said again, "even when I couldn't move." Marcus knelt beside the bed. "That's because he remembered what he was trained to do. And somehow he found you, even after all that time." Clara tilted her head, her voice soft. "Time?" "He went missing almost a year ago," Marcus said. "No one knew where he was, until you." Clara looked down at her hands, thinking hard, as if trying to make sense of something that didn't need sense. Then she looked up and said, with the quiet certainty only a child could deliver, "I think he was waiting." Daniel and Marcus exchanged a glance. Neither spoke. "Because what do you say to that?" She wasn't wrong. They stayed just a few minutes longer. Long enough for Clara to ask again if she could see Echo when he was better. Long enough for her to smile again this time with more color in her cheeks. Long enough to feel, in some quiet corner of their chests, that they'd done something that mattered. As they left, Rachel touched Daniel's sleeve. "Thank you," she said, eyes shining. "Both of you, for giving her back to me." Daniel shook his head. "We just showed up. That dog, he's the one who never left." Marcus had always kept the folder. It was tucked in the back of a metal filing cabinet in his garage, wedged between old deployment rosters and weathered copies of K-9 handler training protocols. He hadn't opened it in years, not since he'd walked away from the search and rescue program for good. But tonight, as snow tapped against the windows of his small home, he reached for it with shaking hands. He didn't even need to look at the label on the worn tab. He knew what it was. SAR Unit 14B, Incident Report, Black Ridge Avalanche. He pulled the file free and brought it to the kitchen table, where an old mug of coffee had long since gone cold. The table creaked as he sat down, Echo's name still echoing in his ears, spoken by Clara in the hospital, then again by the vet techs like a myth rediscovered. He opened the folder. The first page was the official report. Language clinical, cold. Just the facts. On March 2nd, SAR Unit 14B was deployed to Black Ridge to assist with avalanche rescue following a late-season collapse. Handler Sergeant Kyle Hanley was injured during the secondary slide. His partner, K-9 Echo, was last seen entering Zone Delta in search of missing climbers. Echo did not return. Marcus skimmed down to the last line, highlighted in yellow from years ago. Status, presumed KIA. No recovery. But that was wrong. Echo hadn't died. She had lived, survived, endured. He flipped through the pages, old photos of the team, one of Echo mid-jump during a training drill, muscles tense, focus absolute. Another photo showed her curled next to her handler during a base camp break. Even in still images, there was something unmistakable in her eyes, intelligence, loyalty, and something deeper, purpose. Marcus remembered the chatter that had gone around the base after the Black Ridge mission, how Echo had vanished into the storm, how rescuers had searched for hours, then days, before they'd called it. Most believed she'd fallen into a crevasse or been swept away in a secondary slide. The weather had been brutal. No trace of her was ever found. Until now. He leaned back in his chair, fingers pressing against his temples. How had she survived? The wilderness up there wasn't just cold, it was unforgiving. Wolves, frost, isolation. It was no place for a lone dog, no matter how well trained. Unless. She didn't stay up there. Unless she kept moving. Marcus opened his laptop and began typing. He pulled up the central K-9 registry system, keyed in Echo's tag number from memory, SAR K-9 14B Echo. The profile came up. Deactivated, archived. Handler, Sergeant Kyle Hanley. Breed, German Shepherd. Working line assigned. Region, Northern Search and Rescue Ops. Montana Unit certifications. Avalanche detection, missing persons, wilderness tracking. Date of deactivation, March 6th. Presumed lost in line of duty. There was a note in the margin. A quote from Hanley himself filed during the debrief before he was medically discharged. "If she's out there, she won't stop searching. That's who she is. That's who I trained her to be." Marcus stared at that sentence for a long time. The pieces were fitting together now. Echo had been trained to detect life under snow, to track scent trails across impossible terrain. She had been built, mentally and physically, for one purpose: to find what others couldn't. And somehow, nearly a year after vanishing, she had crossed who knew how many miles and ended up in a snowy park in another state, beside a child in the middle of a blizzard, doing exactly what she was trained to do. Finding someone, protecting them, saving them. Not because she was ordered to, not because she had a handler watching her, but because something inside her refused to quit. Marcus sat back, staring at the screen, the cursor blinking beside the words, "Presumed lost. Not anymore." He reached for his phone. Whitaker answered on the second ring. "Marcus?" "I found her file," he said. "Echo, SAR Unit 14B. She was real, not just a stray." "I figured as much." "There's more," he said. "She was trained for avalanche work, missing persons, one of the best. She went missing in the Rockies. That means if she walked all the way here, she crossed over 2 states, alone." Whitaker was quiet for a moment. Then, "She wasn't just surviving." "No," Marcus said. "She was looking." Before he hung up, he clicked on one last link, an archived press release issued by the SAR unit after Echo was declared lost. It was short, written in that stiff, restrained tone typical of military formalities. K9 Echo served with distinction and loyalty. Her final act was one of courage. "We honor her service. We grieve her absence." Marcus let out a slow breath. Not absent, not anymore. He clicked Download, saving a copy of the file to his desktop. Then he opened a blank document, paused, and typed a new title. K9 Echo. Recovered. And below it, he wrote a single line. "Some dogs don't stop serving when the mission ends. Some just keep looking until they find the one who needs them most." The snow had stopped falling outside, but in Rachel Reynolds's chest, it still hadn't settled. She sat across from Marcus and Daniel in the small hospital cafe, hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup of untouched tea. Her hair was pulled back hastily, the dark circles under her eyes proof of too many sleepless nights. Every few minutes, she'd glance toward the hallway as if expecting someone to call her name with bad news, even though the worst was over, or so they said. Marcus and Daniel didn't push. They just sat with her, waiting. Finally, Rachel exhaled a long, trembling breath that seemed to empty years of strength from her body. "She walks home every day," she said, voice thin. "It's only 10 minutes." Her eyes welled, but she didn't blink them away. "Her school's 4 blocks from our building. She's always careful. We'd practiced that route together so many times she could walk it blindfolded. Cross only at the lights. Don't talk to strangers. Call me if anything feels off." She looked down at her cup. "But I never told her what to do. When the sky just disappears." It had started like any other afternoon. Clara's class had ended at 3:10 p.m. Rachel had gotten the usual text. "On my way home." Clara even sent a blurry selfie from the playground, her cheeks pink, scarf a little crooked, It was comforting, ordinary. Then 10 minutes passed, then 15. By 20, Rachel was staring out the window, phone in hand. The snow had started falling faster now, thick, sideways sheets that erased color from the world. She tried calling. No answer. Again. Still nothing. By the time she slipped on boots and ran outside, the sidewalks were already disappearing. Visibility dropped so fast she could barely see the opposite end of the street. She should have been home, Rachel whispered, hands trembling around her cup. But she wasn't. And I knew. I didn't have proof, but I knew something was wrong. She went to the school first. The secretary was surprised to see her. Clara left right on time, they said, probably just slowed by the weather. But Rachel knew her daughter, knew how she moved through the world with quiet certainty. Clara didn't dawdle, she didn't wander, and she always answered her phone. The police were called, reports were filed. But then came the words that made Rachel's blood run colder than the storm. None of the security cameras caught her. Not at the school, not at the traffic lights, not at the crosswalk 2 blocks away. The system had glitched citywide. The storm, or maybe a server issue, no one could give a straight answer. But for a window of 45 minutes, the city had no eyes. And it was just long enough for my daughter to vanish, Rachel said bitterly. Into white. They searched. Neighbors, officers, volunteers with flashlights and hand warmers. The storm howled, burying any hope of footprints or trails. No jacket tracks, no boot marks, no indication of which direction Clara had gone. It was like the storm just swallowed her whole, Rachel whispered. She pressed a hand to her lips. I thought maybe she'd ducked into a building or gotten picked up by someone trying to help. But no one had seen her. Not a single person. Her voice cracked, eyes falling shut. And I couldn't breathe. Because every minute that passed, I kept thinking about how cold her hands get, how she hates wet socks, how she's scared of the dark. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. Marcus lowered his eyes. By 5:30, the dispatcher said they'd issue a missing child alert. I was sitting in my living room staring at her snow boots by the door, wondering if I'd ever hear her voice again. Rachel's voice was steady now, but only because she was holding it together with something paper thin. And then the call came from the hospital. They told me she'd been found in a park. In the snow, not breathing, but alive. She paused. And there was a dog. She finally looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes. They told me the dog saved her, that he lay beside her all night, that she was half buried but still warm. Marcus nodded. He wasn't just beside her. He was covering her, like a shield. Rachel swallowed hard. I didn't even know his name until Clara said it. Daniel glanced over. Echo, she nodded. She whispered it in her sleep last night. Said he didn't bark. Said he didn't leave. Her voice broke on that word. Leave. Everything was gone. The world, the sound. But not him. She remembers that. Marcus leaned forward, his voice quiet. That's how he was trained. To stay until help came. Rachel blinked, confused. Trained? Marcus nodded. He was part of a search and rescue unit. Went missing during a mission in the Rockies almost a year ago. Everyone assumed he died. Rachel stared at him. He didn't die, she said. He was just waiting. She looked away again, but this time there was something else in her expression. Not fear, not grief, just awe. For the next few minutes, no one spoke. Outside the cafe window, the storm clouds began to lift. The sky was still pale, still cold, but brighter. Rachel stood slowly, her tea still full. "I think she'd want to see him," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "When he's strong enough, we'll bring him." Rachel turned, her hand brushing the door. "She told me once that dogs can hear the world in ways we can't. Maybe that's why Echo found her." Then, softer, "Maybe he heard her heart when everything else was silent." The snow wasn't white in her memory. It was gray. Heavy. The kind of gray that swallowed sound, that blurred the edge of everything until there was no street, no sky, only the crunch of her boots and the tremble in her fingers. Clara stared out the hospital window, a paper cup of broth in her hands, still too weak for solid food, but awake enough now to notice the details. The trees outside were lined in frost. Cars passed below like distant murmurs, but she wasn't looking at them. She was searching the snow, trying to understand where it all had gone wrong. "I remember leaving school," she said quietly. Rachel sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I had my gloves on. I was counting steps like always. From the gate to the first crosswalk, 38. Clara paused. Then the wind hit. She didn't describe it like a child. She described it like someone who'd walked into another world. "It came so fast," she whispered, like something broke open in the sky. She had turned down Juniper Street 3 blocks from home. That's when visibility vanished. The world shrank. Cars disappeared. Signs blurred. Sidewalks vanished under snow. "I couldn't tell which way I was going," she said, her voice trailing. "Everything looked the same." She'd tried retracing her steps, turning around. But she couldn't find her own footprints. Every corner looked like the last. Every street felt wrong. "And then my phone stopped working," she added. "I tried to call you." Rachel reached for her hand and squeezed it. "I think I walked in circles for a long time." Clara's brow furrowed. It got quiet after that. She remembered the cold creeping up her arms first, then behind her knees, like frost was climbing her from the inside, and then, "My legs gave out." She said it without drama, just fact. "I sat down. In the snow. I tried to stand again, but I couldn't." The next part was harder to say, her voice lowered to almost nothing. "And then I laid down." She didn't cry, but her fingers tightened around the paper cup. "I knew I wasn't supposed to, but I was so tired, and my body felt too heavy." Rachel pressed her lips together, nodding slowly. Her hand never left Clara's. Silence. For a long time. Then, he didn't make a sound. Clara's eyes moved not toward her mother, but toward something deeper, somewhere only she could still see. He didn't bark, or growl, or whine. He just showed up. Rachel's voice was soft. "You mean Echo?" Clara nodded slowly. "I didn't hear him walk, but suddenly there was warmth." She placed a hand lightly on her chest, right over her heart. "Not in my clothes, inside me, like something told me I wasn't alone." She took a slow breath. "Then I felt fur. He was next to me, then over me, not moving, just there." She couldn't remember his face, not clearly, but she remembered his weight, the steady sound of his breathing, how his chest rose and fell against her shoulder like a living blanket. She remembered how the snow kept falling but somehow didn't feel as sharp anymore, didn't sting. "I thought I was dreaming," she said. "But then he stayed." Rachel wiped at her cheek, silent tears falling. "Even when I couldn't move, even when I couldn't talk, he never left." Clara turned her face to the window again. "There was a moment when everything else went quiet. I couldn't feel my hands. My thoughts felt far away." A pause. "And that's when I thought, maybe I'm supposed to sleep." Rachel's body tensed. "But then I felt him shift, just a little, and something told me, not yet." She didn't say whether it was the dog or something else, but she listened. "I think he was keeping time for me," she added, "like his heartbeat kept mine from stopping." Rachel rested her forehead against Clara's temple, eyes closed. "Maybe it did," she whispered. Outside the window, the sun broke through. For the first time in days, the sky wasn't just white. It was blue. Clara blinked at the light, as if trying to remember what color had felt like. And then very softly she whispered, "I want to see him again." Rachel smiled through her tears. "You will." Clara turned her head, looking up. "Promise?" Rachel kissed the top of her head. "Promise." And somewhere back at the clinic, Echo stirred in his sleep. Not from pain, not from discomfort, but like a soul hearing its name across a great white silence, and knowing it would be called again. The cafe in the hospital lobby wasn't much more than a quiet alcove with 3 round tables and a self-serve coffee machine that made more noise than caffeine. But that morning, it held something sacred. Rachel spotted them first. Daniel leaning against the counter, hands in his coat pockets. Marcus seated by the window with a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. Their faces were tired, their clothes still showing traces of the storm they'd walked through days ago, but their eyes lit up the moment she approached. "You're back," Daniel said softly, setting his cup down. "I told Clara I'd come find you," Rachel replied, her voice gentle but clear. "She asked if you were real. Said sometimes she's afraid this is just a dream." Marcus stood, but she motioned for him to stay seated. "You don't have to stand for me," she said, smiling. "You already carried the weight that matters." They all sat. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was understood. There were no rehearsed thank yous, no speeches, just 3 people bound together by a moment that none of them could explain, but none would ever forget. "I don't know what to say," Rachel finally whispered. "You saved her, not just by finding her, but by trusting what you saw, what you heard." Marcus shook his head. "It was Echo." Rachel's eyes softened. "Clara says the same. She doesn't talk about the snow or how scared she was. Only him, the way he laid there like he belonged to her." Daniel glanced out the window, watching the morning light break through the clouds. Maybe he did. A few minutes later the elevator chimed and a small figure stepped into view. Clara. Thin, still pale, moving slowly but upright. Her hospital gown was hidden beneath a thick fleece robe covered in cartoon stars. A knit hat was pulled low over her ears. Rachel rose instinctively and crossed to meet her, steadying her by the elbow. "I told them I wanted to walk," Clara said, her voice soft but sure. Her gaze swept the cafe until it found the two men, and then her smile bloomed. It wasn't wide, but it was real. The kind of smile that feels like sunlight after too long in the dark. She walked over slowly and sat beside Marcus, who gave her space but couldn't stop the emotion that flickered across his face. He'd seen bravery in the field, watched soldiers push past broken bones and fear, but none of it compared to the quiet resilience of this little girl with stormlight in her eyes. "Hi," Clara said. "Hey there," Daniel replied. "You look stronger already." Clara nodded once. "I feel warmer." She paused, then added, "Thank you for finding me." Marcus cleared his throat. "We were just lucky to be in the right place." "No," Clara said, shaking her head gently. "He stayed with me, but you came." There was a quiet reverence in her voice that made all three adults fall silent. Then, as if she had waited long enough, Clara asked the question that had been rising in her chest since she walked in. "Can we see him?" Rachel looked to Daniel, then Marcus. No hesitation, no deflection. "Yes," she said. "I think it's time." Later, they would try to explain to Clara the details, the vet visits, the frostbite treatment, the months Echo had likely spent alone in the wilderness. They'd tell her about his background, the SAR unit, the mountains. But for now, none of that mattered. All she wanted was to see the dog who didn't bark, who didn't leave, the dog who had found her in the white, and stayed. The shelter sat at the edge of town, tucked behind a veterinary clinic, hidden partly by snow-dusted pines. It wasn't fancy, just a small, quiet place that felt sacred to Clara, like a part of her still lived there. Rachel parked and turned to her daughter. "You okay?" Clara nodded, gloved hands fidgeting in her lap. There was no fear, just a trembling hope. Rachel squeezed her hand. "Marcus said Echo only lifts his head when the door opens. Maybe he's been waiting." Inside, the shelter was warm and still. Most dogs rested, but at the end of the hall lay a large German shepherd. His fur was patchy from frostbite. His bandaged leg rested awkwardly, but his eyes awake, focused. When Clara entered, Echo lifted his head, slow, deliberate, like waking from something deeper than sleep. Clara stepped closer. Echo stood, unsteady but purposeful, and crossed to meet her. She crouched, whispered, "Hi." Echo lowered his head into her lap, letting go of the weight he'd carried. Clara wrapped her arms around him. No words, no sobs, just quiet. A reunion that felt like a return two souls who'd kept each other alive. Rachel knelt beside them. "You remember her?" she whispered. Clara, eyes glistening, replied, "I think he never forgot." Marcus arrived, pausing at the scene. "Didn't think he'd even stand today." Rachel smiled. She didn't need preparing. They stayed longer than allowed. No one interrupted. When it was time to leave, Clara kissed Echo's head. "See you soon," she whispered. Echo watched her go, ears forward, waiting. The next day, Clara returned. Echo lifted his head before she even reached his run. His tail thumped softly. When she entered, he stood, slow but steady. She touched his tag, tracing the letters. Echo. Rachel waited for her to announce a new name from the list they'd practiced, but Clara shook her head. "I'm not changing it. That's already who he is. His name brought him back." Rachel smiled. "Then Echo it is." In the office, Ms. Fallon, The director smiled at the sight of Echo resting beside Clara. "We've had over 100 calls offers from other states, but the decision doesn't feel like mine." Rachel nodded. "Because it's Echo's?" Fallon's eyes softened. "Because it's already been made." When the paperwork was ready, Echo dozed at Clara's side. Home, even before leaving the shelter. Rachel signed. Clara added a small star beside her name, her way of saying, "This matters." Fallon smiled. "You're not just adopting a dog. You're welcoming back a warrior." Clara shook her head gently. "We're giving him peace." Visits continued as they waited for medical clearance. Echo never looked back once the leash touched Clara's hand. Marcus stopped by too, quieter than usual. "This isn't training," he told Clara, teaching her to read Echo's posture. "It's listening. He's not a soldier anymore. He's whatever you need him to be." Echo obeyed gently, out of trust, not command. He flinched at loud sounds, but always softened under Clara's touch. She started drawing again. Echo in soft pencil lines, his name in block letters. By the third visit, her notebook was half full. By the fourth, she added colors: brown for Echo's coat, gray for the winter sky. Rachel watched the drawings, her voice cracking. "He's bringing her back." Marcus only nodded. One afternoon, Marcus and Rachel watched Clara and Echo curled together. "She's going to be okay," Marcus said. Rachel whispered, "I thought it would take years." Marcus replied, "It's not about fixing her. It's about reminding her she's not broken." At their final visit before adoption, Fallon handed them a certificate. Adoption. Pending Echo. Clara held it carefully. "Can I hang it on my wall?" Rachel smiled. "Of course." That night, Clara pinned it above her bed next to a drawing. A girl. A dog. "He waited. So I came back." The front door creaked open with a sound that seemed too ordinary for the moment it held. Clara stood just inside the apartment, holding the leash with both hands. Echo stepped over the threshold with hesitant pause, his body low, nose twitching as he scanned the unfamiliar air. The hallway was quiet, warm, scented faintly with cinnamon and old wood polish. It didn't smell like shelters, or snow, or pain. It smelled like somewhere else, somewhere safe. Rachel let the door close behind them gently, as if any loud sound might scare away what they'd fought so hard to bring home. They didn't speak at first. Clara simply looked up at Echo and whispered, "This is yours now." Then she dropped to one knee and unhooked the leash, giving him space to decide. Echo stood still. Then slowly, silently, he walked forward. Not with a wag or a bark, but with the cautious grace of a survivor unsure if this peace was real. His paws padded across the hardwood, past the kitchen, past the coat hooks where Clara's snow jacket hung like a memory. And then, with the certainty of someone who didn't need directions, he turned into Clara's room. The welcome corner had taken them 2 full days to prepare. Rachel had helped with the essentials: food and water bowls, a crate with soft lining in case he needed solitude, and a basket of rubber toys. But it was Clara who curated the details. She had folded the blanket herself, an old one with faded stars she used to curl beneath on movie nights. She'd placed her favorite plush giraffe beside it, not because she thought Echo would play with it, but because she wanted him to know he was part of her world. A nameplate made from cardboard and stickers sat on the windowsill. Echo's Spot. Not a cage, not a station, not a post. Just a spot. A choice. Echo paused at the edge of the rug as if unsure if this soft little nest was really for him. Clara held her breath. Then, without ceremony, he stepped forward, circled once, and lowered himself slowly into the blanket. His body moved stiffly worn joints and healed scars making their voices known. But once settled, he released a sigh so deep it seemed to come from somewhere older than time. Rachel pressed a hand over her chest. Clara crouched beside him, fingers tracing the outer edges of his fur. "He fits," she whispered. Later that evening, as the shadows from the hallway light spilled into the room, Rachel peeked in to find Clara already curled up on her bed, a book in hand. Echo was still at his spot, head low, eyes half-lidded, but not asleep, watching, always watching. "Everything okay in here?" Rachel asked softly from the doorway. Clara nodded, then looked at her mother like she hadn't in weeks. Eyes bright, open. I think he was always supposed to come here." Rachel smiled, stepping inside with a folded quilt. "Maybe we were waiting for him too." Before turning off the lights, Clara leaned over the side of the bed and whispered to Echo, "You don't have to look anymore, I'm here." Echo didn't move, but his tail brushed the floor. Once. At 2:37 a.m., Rachel woke to a soft noise, a faint scuffle, then silence. She tiptoed down the hall, expecting maybe a spilled water bowl or Echo pacing unfamiliar territory. Instead, she found Clara asleep with one hand dangling off the side of her bed, and Echo, curled in the same spot, chin resting directly under her palm. He hadn't left, not once. Outside, the wind began to howl again. But inside that small apartment, beneath the quiet breathing of a girl and the steady presence of a dog, the storm never touched them. For the first time in what felt like forever, the welcome was complete, and the corner was no longer just a corner. It was home. The apartment was quiet, too quiet for a home that had weathered so many restless nights. Rachel stood barefoot in the hallway, one hand still on the light switch, afraid to breathe too loud. She didn't want to disturb what she was seeing. Not this. Clara was asleep. Deeply, peacefully. Her face was turned toward the wall, cheek pressed into the pillow, one arm tucked under her chin. Her body wasn't curled in that guarded, knotted way Rachel had grown used to since the day everything changed. No tension in the jaw, no flickers behind closed eyelids, just rest. It was the first time in nearly a year that Clara hadn't cried herself to sleep. Rachel blinked once, slowly. Then she looked down. Echo lay at the foot of the bed, stretched out on the rug, not touching Clara, but never far. His ears flicked as Rachel shifted her weight, but he didn't lift his head. His eyes, though, those deep amber eyes, remained fixed on the girl, watching, like he'd been assigned a post and wouldn't dare abandon it. Rachel stepped further into the room, almost in disbelief. The air was warm, thick with quiet comfort. A soft hum from the radiator, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. And no crying, no tossing, no whispered calls for the father who couldn't answer anymore. She glanced around the room. The drawings on the wall, so many of them Echo now framed in taped corners and childish determination. Paws, noses, eyes. One drawing sat on the desk. A snowy park with a girl and a dog, both figures rendered in soft blue. Rachel walked to it and brushed her fingers across the paper. "She dreams of him now," she whispered to herself. Not of what she lost. A small creak behind her. She turned. Echo had shifted just enough to reposition his head, still facing Clara. His nose lifted an inch, as if sampling the air, then settled back down. Rachel crouched, knees cracking, and reached out. Her fingers hovered above his fur for a second before she dared to touch. "Thank you," she whispered. Echo didn't move, but his tail brushed the rug, just once. Rachel stayed like that for several minutes, crouched beside the animal who had carried her daughter through a storm of snow and silence and loss. He hadn't barked. He hadn't fought. He had simply endured. She remembered what the vet had said about how thin he was, how old scars crisscrossed his body beneath the fur, a burn along his flank, a cracked molar, signs of frostbite healing in crooked lines. And still, he stayed. Even now, Clara stirred in her sleep, shifting under the blanket. Instantly, Echo's head came up, eyes sharp, muscles tightening just slightly. He didn't move to her, didn't nudge or whimper. He just watched, calculated, ready. Rachel saw it all, the discipline, the patience, the absolute attunement to her daughter's breath. And then Clara exhaled, a long sigh through her nose, and settled again. Only then did Echo let himself relax. His chin returned to the blanket, eyes half closed. The post wasn't abandoned, just momentarily at ease. Rachel rose slowly, careful not to wake either of them. She backed out into the hallway, pulling the door halfway shut, not all the way. Clara still didn't like that. But tonight, it wasn't fear that demanded the light stay on. It was habit, and habit could be broken. Rachel leaned her back against the wall and let the tears come. Not the panicked kind. Not grief. Just release. She whispered into the silence. He's guarding her dreams now. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she went to bed without fear. In the room behind her, the girl slept on, and so did the dog who never truly rested, because some hearts are wired for vigilance, and Echo's had never unlearned the watch. Clara stood in front of the whiteboard, holding her drawing with both hands. Her fingers gripped the paper so tightly the edges curled. Behind her, a soft hum of kid chatter had quieted. 23 sets of eyes were watching, waiting. Ms. Delaney gave her a small nod of encouragement from her desk, her warm smile steady as a bridge. Clara's voice trembled barely above a whisper. "This is called The Dog Who Found Me." She held up the drawing. A simple sketch. Crayon on craft paper. A snowy field, a curled dog, and a girl tucked into his body like a secret. The background wasn't detailed, just the suggestion of trees and wind. But the center where Echo and Clara were drawn was colored in full, bold strokes. You don't have to talk about what happened," Ms. Delaney had said gently a few days earlier. "Only what you feel." So Clara spoke not about the storm or the freezing, not about the pain. She didn't say anything about the hospital or the IVs or the nurses who spoke too softly when they thought she couldn't hear. Instead, she said, "He was just there. He didn't bark or anything. He just stayed." The class was still. One boy sniffled. Another blinked hard and looked away. Clara felt her hands loosen on the paper. "I drew this because I wanted people to know he wasn't scary. Just quiet. He didn't save me like in movies. He didn't break down doors or chase bad guys. He just laid down and didn't move. She paused, heart beating wildly. And then someone clapped. It was soft, almost unsure. Then another, and then more. By the time Clara walked back to her seat, the drawing still in hand, she realized something she hadn't known she needed to. They saw her. Not just as the girl from the news, not just a name whispered in hallways. They saw her as the girl who had survived, and the dog who had stayed. After school that day, Rachel waited at the curb with Echo, who sat calmly at her side in his new red harness. The moment Clara stepped out the front doors, a ripple moved through the kids. Whispers, pointing, but not mean, not mocking, curious, awed even. That's him. That's the dog. Is it true he found her in a blizzard? A group of younger students cautiously approached. One girl, no older than 6, reached out with a mittened hand. "Can I pet him?" Clara looked to Rachel, who nodded, then to Echo, who didn't move, just watched the girl with calm eyes. "He's okay with it," Clara said, "just gentle." As the girl patted his fur, Clara knelt beside her. "He listens more than he talks," she said quietly, "but that's kinda his thing." The girl giggled. "I like him." Clara smiled. "Me too." At home, she hung the drawing on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a paw print. She didn't mention the class clapping. She didn't say anything about the attention or the way one teacher cried behind her glasses. But that night, she didn't ask for the hallway light to be left on. She just curled beside Echo on the floor for a while, forehead pressed to his shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, Clara and Echo became familiar faces in the neighborhood. At the grocery store, cashiers leaned over the counter to offer dog biscuits. At the cafe, the barista once scribbled "Echo" on Clara's hot chocolate cup. At the park, strangers approached, not with pity, but with admiration. "Is that the dog from the rescue story? God, I remember reading about that. What a miracle." Clara never said much. She just nodded, one hand always resting on Echo's head, or back, or shoulder. Some kids still stared, unsure. Some adults asked too many questions. But Clara had learned how to answer without opening old wounds. "He stayed with me," she'd say simply. "That's all." Rachel once joked that Echo had become more recognizable than most local politicians. Marcus, when he visited, simply said, "He earned it." But the fame never changed Echo. He still watched every window, still walked a half step ahead of Clara on sidewalks, slowing at every driveway, every hedge, still paced lightly during storms, still laid beside her bed at night with ears half alert. The world could clap and photograph and wave all it wanted. Echo's job, his chosen purpose, was singular, and it slept under lavender bed sheets, carrying a stuffed giraffe. Clara had once lived in the shadows of fear. Now, every footstep forward, whether down a school hallway or through a winter park, was hers. Echo just made sure those footsteps never had to echo alone. The living room had never felt this quiet, not even during those long winter nights, or when Clara first came home from the hospital. But today the silence wasn't from grief. It was from anticipation. The journalist, Elise, sat across from Clara with a notebook and recorder. No camera crew, no bright lights, just warm eyes and gentle questions. Echo lay nearby, watching with calm alertness. "I know it's been a lot," Elise said softly. "We can stop any time." Clara nodded and began. "It was snowing, not pretty like in books, loud, blinding. I thought I could get home before it got bad, but then I couldn't see where the street was. I fell. I don't remember hitting the ground, just the quiet and cold." She glanced at Echo. "And then there was him. He didn't bark. He didn't panic. He just curled around me, like a shield." Elise leaned forward. "Did you know he was there to help?" "No. I just wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't move, but I felt warm, not because it was warm, but because he didn't leave." "He didn't bark?" Clara whispered again. "He just stayed." After the interview, Elise stayed for tea, asking about Echo's history and training. Before she left, she crouched to Echo's level and whispered, "Thank you for staying." Then to Clara, "You're very brave." Clara shook her head. "I wasn't. He was." 3 days later, the article was published. He just stayed. No embellishments, just Clara's words. A photo. Clara on the porch, Echo beside her, both looking slightly off camera, as if waiting for something they trusted would come. The story spread first locally, then far beyond. Comments poured in. "I've never cried from an article before. We don't deserve dogs like him. Sometimes it's not the rescue, but the staying. That's what breaks me." Clara folded the article into her sketchbook. She didn't need to prove anything. She'd lived it and was still living it, step by step, with Echo by her side. That night, sitting on her bedroom floor, she whispered, "They finally know." Echo didn't bark. He just stayed. The phone rang just after dusk. Marcus, seated at his kitchen table, hesitated but answered. "Marcus Hayes?" "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Hank Durrell. I trained Echo before he went missing." Marcus sat straighter. He thought the search and rescue team had moved on long ago. "We saw the article," Hank said. "The line, 'He didn't bark, he just stayed.' It's Echo all over." They spoke about how Echo had gone missing during a mountainside rescue mission, presumed lost after an avalanche. But somehow, nearly a year later, Echo had reappeared, not as a search dog, but as a guardian. "Why her?" Hank asked quietly. "I've asked myself that every day," Marcus replied. He described how Echo shielded Clara, near death but unwilling to move. "Maybe that was what kept him alive," Marcus said. "Stillness wasn't a lack of action with Echo," Hank said. "It was focus. That girl, she wasn't just lucky, she was chosen." They discussed theories, instinct, duty, something beyond explanation. Before they ended the call, Hank asked, "Could we visit him?" "Not for evaluation, just to see him again." "I think he'd like that," Marcus said. Later that night, Marcus visited Clara and Rachel. Watching Echo lying beside Clara's chair, he whispered, "They're asking about you, old friend, wanting to know how you did it." Echo blinked slowly. No bark, no wag, just quiet contentment. He had done what he was meant to do. At the school assembly, Clara took the stage beside Echo. No vest, no leash. Just his presence, calm, protective, limping slightly from an old injury. "Most of you know the story, or think you do," Clara began. "But stories are more than headlines." She spoke of the storm, the fear, the quiet that saved her. "He didn't bark. He didn't try to wake me. He just stayed, gave me his warmth, his silence. When everything else disappeared, he didn't." Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "Heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they just know who needs them." The room fell into reverent silence. Afterward, students gathered to ask questions, to pet Echo, to simply be near him. Echo welcomed every gentle hand, his tail, moving just enough. Later, Clara found a note slipped into her backpack. "I used to think I was the only one who got scared. Thank you for saying it out loud." She glanced at Echo, waiting by the door, ears tilted toward her. And in that moment she knew. This wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. There was no grand moment when things became normal again. No trumpet sound or switch flipped. It just happened day by day. One quiet morning followed by another. One breath after the last. One boot laced up. One paw print beside it. A girl and a dog. Walking together. By mid-April, the snow had thinned, leaving behind soggy patches of earth and a smell Clara now associated with something sacred. Second chances. She zipped up her jacket, pulled her scarf tight, and waited by the door. Echo was already sitting beside it. He didn't need a command. He never had. The leash was more of a formality now, something to make the neighbors feel better. Outside, the world was still waking. Damp sidewalks. Birds experimenting with half-hearted songs. Echo stepped out first, nose to the wind, eyes alert. Always alert. Clara followed, her boots splashing through shallow puddles that hadn't yet found a drain. She didn't speak, and neither did Echo. But the silence between them wasn't emptiness. It was rhythm. It was understanding. Their walks had become ritual. Down the hill, past the bakery with the orange awning, around the edge of Wren Park where the swings still creaked even without anyone on them, then through the wooded trail near the creek. Every time, Echo's gaze moved with clockwork precision side to side, over the shoulders, back again, as if the trees might shift without warning, as if danger lived in the rustle of leaves. Clara used to think it was fear, but Marcus had taught her otherwise. "It's memory," he'd explained one afternoon. "Echo doesn't panic. He scans. That's how he keeps others safe." Now, she noticed how Echo never walked ahead of her for long. He'd pause when she paused, slow when she slowed. And when they crossed a crowded intersection, his body leaned slightly in front, just enough to create space. The park changed with the season. Where once there had been ice and solitude, now there were people again, strollers and joggers and kids on scooters. Echo didn't flinch. He didn't growl or tense. He simply watched. Every eye movement, every shift in weight, was a calculation. Was the ball flying too fast? Was the man shouting into his phone a threat? Did that backpack on the bench belong to someone? And still he walked beside Clara. One Saturday, they tried the trail behind the old reservoir. A longer loop. More birds. More distance. Clara packed 2 granola bars and a water bottle for herself, and a Ziploc of dried chicken bits for Echo. Just like Marcus showed her. She laughed when Echo stopped halfway up the incline, sat down, and waited for her to catch her breath. "You think you're in charge," she said between gasps. Echo didn't move, but his ears twitched in something she'd learned to recognize. Approval. Rachel had started noticing the difference. Clara smiled more now, not the reflex kind, but the slow, quiet ones that grew from somewhere deeper. She slept with the window cracked open again. She didn't ask to keep the lights on. She hummed to herself while brushing her hair. And every time she came home from school, the first thing she did was drop her backpack, kneel to the floor, and whisper, "You waited." Echo always did. Sometimes Clara caught him staring, not out of fear, but out of memory. He'd sit in the corner of her room, eyes following the dust motes, watching, listening. When thunder rolled in, he would lift his head first, just slightly. His body would go still, his breathing slow. But not once had he tried to hide. Clara learned not to reach for him too quickly. Instead, she sat nearby, waited, matched his quiet. Eventually, he'd lay his head on her feet. Not afraid, just remembering. There were days when the world felt new again. They would walk past someone who recognized them, usually from the newspaper photo or the school assembly. "That's the girl," they'd whisper. "That's the dog." Clara would nod politely. Echo would say nothing. But Clara had grown to understand something unspoken, something powerful. She didn't owe the world a performance. Her healing didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be honest. And each step, each sunrise walk, each shared moment of stillness was a promise. I will keep showing up. You will keep watching. And together, we will never be alone again. It started with a sound. Not loud, not sudden, just a low rumble in the distance. Clara didn't even notice at first. She was coloring at the coffee table, feet tucked under her, soft jazz humming from the speakers. Rachel stood at the kitchen counter, slicing apples into neat rows. Outside, the sky was heavy with spring clouds, the kind that carried more memory than moisture. Then Echo stood up. Not quickly, not suddenly, but with a stiffness that felt unnatural. He walked to the window, tail low, ears pricked, not in curiosity, but in warning. And then he stopped, frozen, completely still. Clara noticed first. "Echo?" she called softly, setting down her crayon. He didn't move. Rachel turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Is he okay?" Clara stood. "He's just standing there." The sky cracked again. Another long, slow roll of thunder, deeper now. Echo's body tensed, like a taut wire. His breathing changed, not faster, just shallow. Then Rachel saw it. The tremble, subtle. A small vibration in his hind leg, as if some memory was trying to claw its way out from under his skin. "Echo?" Clara whispered, approaching slowly. But as she reached for him, his eyes shifted, not wild, not aggressive, just far away, like he wasn't in the room anymore, like he wasn't in this time anymore. Rachel moved gently, stopping Clara with a hand. "Let him be," she murmured. They watched in silence. For nearly 10 minutes, Echo didn't move. He just stared out the window, not seeing the trees or the traffic, but something else entirely, somewhere else. That night, after Clara had gone to bed, Rachel sat on the couch, phone in hand, thumb hovering over Marcus's name. She hesitated, then tapped. Marcus picked up on the second ring. "I think Echo had a moment," Rachel began, "during the storm." Marcus didn't ask what kind. Instead, he just said, "Tell me what happened." She described everything. The freezing, the stillness, the way his eyes seemed distant. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Sounds like a trauma trigger," he said. "Happens more than people realize, especially with working dogs, especially the ones who were in search and rescue units. Explosions, collapses, weather events, they tie it all together." Rachel was quiet. "Can he heal from that?" There was a pause. Then, "He can, but not alone." The next weekend, Marcus showed up with a small duffel bag and a calm energy that settled the room the moment he entered. He sat cross-legged on the floor, back straight, hands open. Echo approached with cautious steps. "Hey, soldier," Marcus said quietly. No leash, no commands, just presence. He waited. Echo sat. Over the next hour, Marcus walked them through what he called trauma deconditioning techniques. Simple things, soft tones, gradual desensitization. He pulled out a small speaker and played a muted thunderstorm file barely audible. Echo tensed but didn't freeze. "That's good," Marcus noted. "We keep it low, then reinforce calm behavior." Rachel watched, fascinated. "Like therapy," Marcus nodded. "Exactly. Dogs don't rationalize fear. They remember it. And sometimes they relive it." Clara sat nearby, her sketch-pad in her lap, drawing without looking down. Echo's ears twitched, eyes flicking toward her every now and then. It helped. She helped. Days turned into weeks. The storms came and went, and each time the freezing lasted a little less. Rachel learned how to spot the signs: subtle stiffening, the shift in breathing. Clara learned when not to speak, when to simply sit and be there. And Echo learned something too, that the storm didn't mean collapse, that the thunder was just noise, that this home, this place, was safe. One afternoon, another storm passed overhead, louder this time, wind howling, windows rattling. Echo stood. He didn't walk to the window. He walked to Clara, sat beside her, pressed his side gently against hers. She looked down, then smiled. Not a word was said, but it didn't have to be. It was late past midnight when Rachel found herself standing in the doorway again. She didn't mean to. She hadn't planned to. But something had stirred her from sleep, a feeling more than a sound. And now, here she was, holding her breath like an uninvited guest, staring into the soft glow of Clara's nightlight. The little girl was fast asleep, one arm flung loosely over the warm body curled beside her. Echo lay tucked close, his fur rising and falling in steady rhythm. His nose rested on Clara's blanket, tail still, breath deep. At some point in the night, Clara had twisted toward him, her forehead brushing his shoulder. In sleep, they looked like two survivors sharing a secret that words could never carry. Rachel didn't move, didn't want to, because in that single quiet moment, she saw it, truly saw it, for the first time. She saw the emptiness she had carried for months, the kind that didn't scream, didn't wail, it just sat there, in the way she hesitated before locking the door, in the way she checked the time every 10 minutes, in the way she stood too long outside Clara's bedroom at night, listening for a breath that might not come. Rachel had spent every waking hour since the storm pretending to be strong, but fear had never really left. Until now. She leaned her shoulder against the doorframe. The house was utterly still, the kind of silence she used to dread. But tonight, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Echo stirred slightly in his sleep, one ear flicking as if acknowledging her presence. Rachel smiled. She didn't know where he'd come from or how fate had looped his path into theirs. But she no longer believed in coincidence. Not after watching the way Echo looked at Clara like she was his mission. Not after seeing how he paced beside her on walks like a sentinel. Not after noticing how he'd place himself between her and anything unfamiliar, even a stranger's laugh too loud in the park. And not after watching Clara come back to life. Because it hadn't happened all at once. Healing never does. It had been in small things, like the day Clara ran down the hall instead of walking, or the night she asked for an extra story, or when she sang to herself, absently, quietly, while brushing her hair. Tiny resurrections. And through them all, Echo had been there, not demanding, not needing anything, just present. Rachel stepped forward, closer to the bed. She reached down and tucked the blanket gently over Clara's arm. The girl didn't stir. Echo's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. He didn't lift his head, didn't move, but Rachel could feel it. He saw her, and she nodded softly. "Thank you," she whispered. Not just for the snow, not just for the rescue, but for the days that followed. For every moment Clara smiled. For every fear Echo absorbed, wordlessly, simply by staying near. Rachel sank onto the edge of the bed and rested her palm lightly on Echo's side. Warm, solid, real. And for the first time since that terrible night, she let herself feel what she hadn't dared to before. Safe. The tears came quietly, warm and slow. Not from sadness, but from release. From the unspoken truth that Echo hadn't just saved Clara from the cold. He'd saved her, Rachel, from something colder still. The hollow ache of helplessness. The silence of not knowing. The paralysis of fear pretending to be strength. In that dim room with no applause, no cameras, no headlines, only breath and fur and the rhythm of healing. Rachel finally understood what she couldn't have before. Echo hadn't found Clara. They'd found each other. And through Clara, he'd found her too. She stayed there until the clock ticked past 1. Then, rising gently, she turned back toward the hallway. But before she left, she looked once more at the pair nestled on the bed. And this time, she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt like part of something whole, something warm, something alive again. The town square had never looked like this. Rows of chairs stretched across the lawn. Families gathered, bundled in scarves and coats, sharing coffee and hot chocolate. A news van idled nearby. But all fell quiet when Echo stepped forward. No leash, no uniform, just his gray fur now touched with white, his limp still visible. He walked beside Clara, silent, steady. Clara held her head high, one hand resting lightly on Echo's back. The townspeople rose to their feet, not because they were told, but because they felt it. Rachel, Marcus, and Daniel watched, hearts full. At the podium, the mayor spoke. "We gather today not for another ceremony, but because silence deserves a standing ovation. This dog didn't wait for orders or wear a badge. But when a little girl's life hung in the balance, he stayed." He presented Echo with a silver tag. Echo, guardian, survivor, friend, and a date, the day of the storm. Clara received a bravery medallion, but she glanced at Echo. "I'll share it with him. He didn't leave me behind. I won't leave him behind either." Applause rose, not loud but steady. Not for fanfare, but for faithfulness. People lined up to thank Clara and Echo, but neither sought the spotlight. When it was time to go, they left quietly, needing no applause. The journey had come full circle, not with noise, but with knowing. An email had sat unread in Marcus's inbox for days. From Captain Langley, now running a SAR K9 center. "Would you come back, even just to observe?" Marcus had left that world, or so he thought. But since Echo's return, silence felt heavier than the past. One frosty morning, he drove to the training field. Echo hopped out of the truck, moving toward the empty field like memory called him. Langley greeted Marcus with no judgment. She handed him a clipboard, a quiet invitation. He accepted. Marcus observed young handlers. One dog barked endlessly, another chewed its harness, a third stared at the sky. He waited, then spoke. "Search and rescue isn't about being loud. It's about being present. He gestured to Echo. Show me. Echo searched without fanfare, found the scent, sat still. No bark, just presence. The field fell silent. A handler whispered, "He's like a ghost." "No," Marcus said. "He's just still doing his job." Weeks passed. Marcus came twice a week, not for medals, but to guide. Echo came too, staying on the sidelines unless invited. His quiet steadiness calmed the dogs more than any command. One handler asked Marcus, "How did you know Echo was still meant for this?" Marcus watched Echo, now resting beneath a pine, because he never stopped choosing to come. At home, Clara sat at her desk, pencil scratching paper. Outside, winter dusk settled in silver and gold. Echo lay nearby, his breathing steady. Voice over. "Clara, dear Echo, you don't need words, but I do. When people ask how I survived, they think I was brave, but I wasn't. You were. I remember your breath, the way you wrapped around me even while freezing yourself. You didn't bark, you didn't panic. You stayed." Her sketches filled the pages, Echo always beside her, never in front, never behind. Voice over continues. "You didn't ask for anything. You waited until help came. Sometimes I think about how close it was, but then I remember what Marcus said. Some dogs don't get lost. They go looking." Clara folded the letter, placed it by Echo's paws, and rested her hand on his fur. He lifted his head slightly. Final voiceover. Softest whisper. "I don't know how you found me, but I'm so glad you did." And in that stillness, no words, no sound, 2 heartbeats remained, still here, still choosing each other. The world looked different now, not because the park had changed, but because they had. Fresh snow blanketed the path in gentle folds, untouched except for 3 sets of footprints, 2 human, 1 canine. The same park that had once been a theater of fear now breathed only quiet. Clara tightened her scarf and held onto Rachel's gloved hand. She walked steadily, no longer limping, no longer flinching from the cold. Beside her, Echo moved with the practiced grace of a sentinel, his fur now fuller, healthier, but still bearing the faint shadow of old scars. It had been nearly a year since that night, almost to the day, and they had come back, not to relive it, but to honor it, to rewrite it. The wind whispered between the trees, not like it did that night when it screamed and stole breath. Today it was soft, brushing through pine needles and drifting snowflakes like a lullaby. "I remember that bench," Clara said, nodding toward the metal curve half buried in snow. Rachel glanced at it, then at her daughter, and squeezed her hand. "You want to stop?" Clara shook her head. "Not yet." They kept walking. A few joggers passed on the opposite side, nodding politely. A golden retriever bounded by on a leash, tail wagging. Echo didn't react, except for a subtle flick of his ear and a quiet glance back to Clara, as if still counting her steps, still watching, still choosing. They reached the clearing. The cluster of trees that had once been nothing more than a backdrop to panic was now quiet and still serene, in a way that almost seemed deliberate. Nature's apology, perhaps, or just time being kind. Clara stepped forward, breaking from her mother's side. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, where the snow was deeper, where the drifts still curved against the bark, like nature remembered. Echo moved beside her. His paws made no sound on the snow, When he reached her, he simply sat, not out of command, but out of memory. Rachel stayed back. Some moments belonged only to those who had survived them. "I was right here," Clara finally said, her voice nearly lost in the hush. "Under those trees." Echo turned his head toward the same spot. Then slowly he lay down in the snow, a perfect circle, protective, familiar. Clara looked down at him, smiled, and knelt beside him, this time on her own terms. "You don't have to do that anymore," she whispered, brushing a hand through his fur. "You saved me already." He looked up, ears forward, but didn't move, as if part of him would always stand guard. Clara didn't push him. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. For a moment, everything else disappeared. There was no anniversary, no memory to fight, just the feeling of fur against cheek, of heartbeats sinking, of being found and never lost again. Rachel watched from the path, blinking fast against the cold sting in her eyes. She remembered the phone call, the hospital lights, the question marks and impossible odds, and the dog-matted, shaking, barely breathing curled around her daughter, like he'd been born for that one singular moment. And maybe he had. Some bonds didn't follow reason. Some were written in the silence between seconds. A light breeze stirred the trees. Snowflakes tumbled gently around them, glinting in the morning sun like fragments of light falling back to earth. Clara opened her eyes. "We should go," she said softly, running her fingers one last time behind Echo's ear. He stood slowly, no longer limping, but still deliberate in every movement. Rachel joined them as they walked back across the field. 3 sets of prints again, but now going forward. The wind picked up again, not loud, not biting, but steady. It moved through the evergreens like a hush laced with memory, brushing the snow-laden branches until they swayed and whispered. The sky above had begun to dim slightly, the way it often does in winter afternoons, the light cooling into shades of silver and pale blue. Clara glanced over her shoulder, expecting Echo to be just behind, but he wasn't. He'd stopped. Back at the edge of the tree cluster, the very same place where they had first found him, nearly frozen, unmoving, wrapped around her like a shield against the night. "Echo?" she called gently, her voice soft but clear. He didn't respond. He just stood there, still as stone, his ears pricked forward, body tense, not in fear, but in something deeper, something old. Clara walked back toward him, crunching lightly through the snow. Rachel paused a few steps behind, sensing this moment wasn't meant to be interrupted. "Echo?" Clara repeated as she approached. "What is it?" The dog's nose twitched slightly, testing the air. His head tilted, ears rotating as if trying to separate signal from silence. Then his gaze drifted not to her, not to the path ahead, but somewhere in between, toward the wind, toward memory. And Clara understood. Not with logic, but with something children seem to carry more easily than adults. Instinct. Feeling. She stood beside him and followed his gaze. There was nothing there, just white and wood and quiet. But it felt like something. Echo shifted slightly, lowering his head, tail still. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just listened, like he had that night, like he always had. Clara thought of what the vet had said months ago, that dogs, especially those like Echo, didn't just remember commands. They remembered moments, smells, temperature, sound, emotion layered into place, and maybe they remembered purpose. "Do you hear it again?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Echo didn't answer, of course, but his stillness spoke. He was somewhere between now and then, between being a dog and being something more, a watcher, a sentinel, a soul that had once chosen her and perhaps still felt the tremor of that moment echoing forward. Clara reached out and touched his shoulder, grounding him. "It's okay," she said. "You brought me home." At that, Echo turned his head slightly toward her, ears relaxing just a little. He blinked slowly, the way he always did when coming back from deep thought. If dogs could have such things, maybe they could. Clara gave him a soft smile. "You don't have to keep listening for the past." The wind swirled once more. This time it carried no cry, no memory, just the sound of snow shifting, the breath of trees. Echo inhaled deeply and exhaled. Then, finally, he moved. They returned to the path. Clara didn't ask what he had heard, if anything. And Echo didn't try to explain, not in a way anyone else could hear. But something lingered in the space they left behind. Not danger, not sadness, just the imprint of something once vital, like a note that fades but leaves you humming. Rachel joined them with a questioning look. "Everything okay?" Clara nodded. "He was just remembering, I think." Rachel glanced toward the trees, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Funny thing about memories," she murmured. "They never really stay buried. Not in people, not in animals, not in places." Clara looked up at her. "Is that a good thing?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Sometimes. Depends what you do with them." As they walked on, Echo's gait was calm again. Not dragging, not alert, just present. And behind them, in the stillness of that patch of snow beneath the trees, the echo lingered, not of barking, not of footsteps, but of a choice once made by a dog who shouldn't have been there, but was, who stayed, and kept watching, even when no one else could. The snow returned that night, not in chaos, not in warning, but with a hush. It drifted down like feathers shaken loose from the sky, blanketing the world in quiet forgiveness. Streetlights haloed the flakes as they fell, casting golden orbs against the window pane of Clara's room. Inside, the heat purred from the vent. Soft shadows moved along the walls, but all was still. Clara lay curled on her side, her cheek resting against a pillow that still smelled faintly of lavender and old wool. The blanket had fallen to her waist, but she didn't pull it up, because Echo was there. Nestled beside her, chest rising and falling in tandem with hers, the German shepherd watched her with eyes that held no fear, no alertness, just presence. His body was no longer wound tight, no longer coiled with the reflex of duty. He was at rest. Clara lifted one hand and traced the line of his ear with her fingers, feather-light. "Hey," she whispered. He blinked once, just once. Her voice trembled not from cold, but from the fullness of something unspeakable. "You don't have to save me anymore." There was a pause. Then, barely audible, fragile, yet sure, she added, "Just stay." Echo didn't bark, didn't whine. He didn't move, not at first. But then, with the same careful grace that had carried her through a storm, he shifted his weight and laid his head directly on her chest, right above her heartbeat, as if anchoring himself not to the room, not to the bed, but to her. Clara closed her eyes and exhaled. Outside, the world whispered, A car passed slowly on the nearby road, tires muffled by snow. A tree branch let go of its burden with a soft thump. Somewhere distant, a wind chime sang once and fell quiet. Inside, time slowed, not stopped, but softened, folded. In that room, on that night, they weren't survivor and savior. They weren't headlines or hospital stories or lucky miracles. They were simply home. Two beings, both broken once, both found in the whiteout. One with a collar that still bore faded letters, the other with dreams she no longer woke up screaming from. And between them, trust not built from commands or instincts, but from that one frozen night when neither one gave up on the other. Rachel stood silently at the doorframe. She hadn't meant to intrude. She'd only come to check to make sure Clara was warm enough, that Echo hadn't stirred. But what she saw rooted her in place. She brought a hand to her mouth, not to hold back words, but to catch the swell rising in her chest. Her daughter, who had once refused to sleep without the hallway light on, now drifted in peace beside a dog who had once wandered alone through a world that forgot him. Rachel's throat tightened, and in that moment she understood something she hadn't been able to name before. Home isn't walls or warm meals or even shared blood. It's that place inside you that exhales when someone stays. Echo didn't stir when Rachel slowly backed away and clicked the door closed. He just stayed. And as the last snowflake of the night touched down on the roof above them, a quiet settled over the house, not of emptiness, but of fullness. Because in this tiny corner of a storm-weary world, a child slept safely. A dog kept watch, not out of fear, but out of love. And in the stillness of it all, something sacred bloomed, not loudly, not with fireworks, but like snow, soft, steady, unshakably real. In a world often too busy to notice the quiet heroes among us, this story reminds us of something powerful. Love doesn't need words, and sometimes salvation comes on 4 legs. Echo wasn't just a rescue dog. He was the echo of loyalty that never faded, of duty that outlasted training, and of love that chose to stay even when the world had already walked away. His bond with Clara wasn't built in a kennel or on command, but in snow, silence, and survival. German shepherds like Echo carry more than strength or intelligence. They carry instinct, memory, and heart. They remind us that even in our darkest winters, connection can still bloom. Let this story be a tribute, not just to a brave K9, but to every animal who waits, protects, forgives, and heals. May it inspire kindness, adoption, and a deeper respect for the creatures who stand beside us without question. Because sometimes the ones who save us aren't the ones we expect. And sometimes home isn't a place, it's who stays when the storm hits.